All right, everyone, welcome back to How I Sell. Today we are here with a phenomenal guest, Mr. Basile Senesi. Baz has spent a lot of time as a sales leader, a strategic advisor, and currently he's at Fundbox, where he has led sales and operations and has also become a strategic advisor there as well. Baz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Got to be on.
Awesome. Well, before we jump into our 5 questions that we ask all our guests on How I Sell Season 2, why don't you tell me, who is Basile Senesi?
Man, where do I start? I think you hit on a lot of points about me professionally. Personally, I like to think of myself as a people leader. I love working with people and getting people to be their best version. It's a lot of work. I think about inspiring talent to reach its full potential, much more so than managing people to do a job. And that's what really I think has defined my career and the success I've had in that career. It's being able to understand what motivates people and working with them to unlock their true potential. When I'm not doing all that stuff, and if I wasn't spending all of my time and energy in tech, you'd find me probably sharing way too much information about my love for wine with anybody who's willing to hear it. And hopefully someday find me trudging through a vineyard when I finally make it big after Fundbox's success and exit in the long run. That's where I want the world to take me.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to have you on the Ramped Offshoot Wine podcast when we make it big as well.
Love it.
Awesome. So let's dive in. As a reminder to our audience, we are asking our guests on season 2 the same 5 questions to get an apples to apples comparison on what it's like to come up through the ranks as a sales leader. So question 1, Baz, what is the best investment an early career salesperson can do for themselves?
Very interesting question. My gut reaction to that is to figure out how to align their individual personal success with the company's success in a way that ultimately makes the time investment they make in the company better their career. So what I mean by that, right, is figure out what's motivating the company, figure out what you want, find a way to help the company get to what they want in a way that leads the company to give back to you in the form of career growth and career development. It's not about, I think solving for what I want. It's solving for what skills do I want to develop and how can I put those skills in service of the company, and surrounding yourself with people who can help teach you those skills. So I think if I summarize that a little bit more clearly, it's surround yourself with leaders and surround yourself with a boss who can figure out what skills will help you get to the next rung of your career that you care to go, and who will figure out how to open the right doors for you and teach you the right degree of skills, or pair you with the right people who can teach you those skills so that you can just develop a much deeper skill set and have that ultimately translates it to career advancement.
Nice. I like it. Very, very thorough explanation. I have a question off that. A lot of times when folks enter in their career, they don't know how to evaluate who's going to actually help them and who's just going to be a leader to tell them what to do. So how do you go about even evaluating or thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it depends on every company, but there's a few principles that I think are always true. Some people are clearly successful in their roles. Surround yourself with them, right? You never want to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, it's really good to be the dumbest person in the room because you'll get to learn a whole bunch from the people that are around you. So seek out the people who are winning at whatever it is that they're doing professionally and find ways to learn from them. Whoever is at the top of the dashboard is probably a good person to ask the question of how are you successful, in the role that we're both sharing. I think that's one. I think the other part, right, is I personally value diversity of opinion quite a bit. And I don't want to know the one way to succeed. I want to know how different people who, see problems differently, come up with different solutions to the same problem. And ultimately, hopefully both those solutions are successful. So I don't look for just one person. I look for multiple people who are having success with specific emphasis on trying to figure out the different things that are making them each individually successful, and then ultimately kind of borrowing the best of all those different things, right? And building your own playbook from that.
Yep, love it. Diversity of thought, and in sales, it is pretty easy to identify that person. It's just check that top of the leaderboard, and you'll find somebody.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, question number 2: what is the biggest surprise you experienced early in your career?
It's a few things. When I came up through the ranks of sales, I was in SMB SaaS specifically. And I think there was this preconceived notion I had that success in a sales career meant that you focused on selling more and more expensive stuff. And as you grow up in your career, you move into mid-market and then you move into enterprise, right? Candidly, like the bigger the deal, the bigger the commission, the more the responsibility, so on and so forth. And so that felt like the natural trajectory. That might have been true for a long time. I think that's really changed in the past, decade, and really in the past 5 years or so, with the kind of coming onto the scene of this like new buzzword, revenue operations. And I think really like what it's meant with respect to that specific question is actually small deals are a lot harder to monetize and to build a business around. And companies that can figure out how to sell correctly to SMB are unlocking a massive market opportunity and can become very, very successful large companies. But the skill set required to build sales engines that can profitably, scalably, and repeatably sell into those segments is actually a lot harder to figure out than selling $1 million deals, twice a quarter. And so, while as an individual contributor, the old adage might still be true that the way to further your career is to sell more expensive stuff. I think as a leader, actually, companies who sell into SMB are putting a premium on solving those problems and are willing to attract some really, really good quality talent and compensate accordingly. Because again, getting the right answers to the questions of selling into SMB is a very, very expensive question and a very well worth solving question. And so I think that, to me, that myth has been somewhat dispelled in the past decade. I want to build my career and my brand around being the guy who helps companies figure out how to sell the unsellable. That's SMB sales. It's the really hard stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. Very, very good advice. Something that you wouldn't get slapped in the face with, obviously, when you're coming out of school too, which is a lot of things that we focus on in this podcast is like, let's just break down the harsh realities. And I think that's one of them is pretty much what you touched on there. So question 3, what's one mistake that you made early in your career that shaped the way you operate today, and how did it shape you?
I think, kind of cliche, but the one thing that time that money really can't buy is time and experience, right? You don't know what mistakes you've made until you've made them and learned lessons from them, and then you know not to make them again.
Yep.
I think when you've kind of like seen the story play out, you have a lot more patience for the stuff that takes longer to happen. And so you end up like thinking longer term in general, because like you've been around the block, you've seen around the corner of like bad decisions in the short term and how they can influence the long term. I think for me, when I was coming up, especially as a sales leader, I'm somewhat conflict averse. I don't like stoking the fires that don't need to be stoked and, picking the fights that don't need to be picked. And so I think I made a lot of non-decisions that really should have been tough decisions around people, around talent, around, performance improvement conversations, et cetera, that I thought were better to just like give somebody else another chance or wait longer, et cetera. And I was like, 6 months later, proven very wrong and ultimately had to have those tough conversations. So I think the single biggest thing that I learned, right, is act decisively. And I think if you think something is going to play out a certain way, it's probably because that's how it's going to play out. And the tough decisions today are the right decisions in the long run. So I think that would be my biggest lesson learned. The cost for me on that was like, you waste a bunch of time investing in somebody that doesn't ultimately fit the bill for the organization. You don't make that person any better for it. You still end up in a tough position and you're not like maximizing your opportunity along the way. I think kind of just like writing on that, one way more human point to realize, right, is the tough conversations are not necessarily bad conversations, and people don't want to fail. And when people are failing, they appreciate nothing more than honest feedback.
Yep.
So I think what I didn't realize was that by like trying to protect people from a bad outcome, I was actually doing them a disservice, and they ended up more frustrated than they might have been had I sat down and had a candid, honest, heart-to-heart conversation with them about the track that they were kind of following. So yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how you sum that up nicely, but that would be probably the biggest lesson learned for me.
Maybe hit conflict head on, or don't shy away from the tough conversations. But I think that's great advice too. And I think it was early in my management career where I kind of felt the same. I wanted everybody to like the new manager, right? I was a young
Sure.
manager. I just wanted to be like accepted, versus, realizing sometimes you can do both, but you can be accepted, you can be well liked. You also can have those tough conversations with folks that end up helping them. It's more the method you deliver them, kind of the radical candor model
Yep.
where you care deeply about the human and then attack the problem right, head on.
100%.
Awesome. Question 4. Who has had the greatest impact on your career? And expand if you can. And sometimes folks offer up a situation that's had the greatest impact in their career, because I don't want to name names here, but I'll let you take it however you want.
Yeah. So I think if I can, I'll answer with both. This is really hard. I'm probably going to offend some people by not mentioning their name. But if I had to pick one person, I think it would be the guy who gave me something that was one size way too big for me and trusted me enough to grow into that role, and ultimately, was proven that it was the right decision. So, Sebastian Reimars was our former CFO and ultimately CRO. He's since left to start his own company, Heyday. They're absolutely killing it. And in the time that I was at Fundbox, he was willing to take a chance on me and actually give me a much more senior leadership position than I was cut out for at the time. He was really effective at figuring out where the guardrails were, figuring out where the areas, in which I could fail and learn new things were, and where the areas where we had to make sure things didn't fall apart also were, and trusted and verified properly to make sure I was doing the right things while not being so close to the action that he wasn't letting me learn. So he shaped quite a bit about who I am as a leader today, and I thank him for that, and I'll not forget that. I think the situation that most shaped me, and it relates to the last question you asked, the single hardest thing I ever had to do in my career is also the most informative for me. 2019, we decided to move our entire client-facing operation from San Francisco to Dallas, Texas. Oh, wow. And I was single-handedly responsible for that project, from finding a city to having all the tough conversations and all the other decisions that need to flow from that. Obviously, I learned a ton. Super interesting project, but also gut-wrenching to tell 40 plus people that you personally hired, interviewed, and worked with for so long that in 2 months' time they wouldn't have a home in this company anymore. And of course, we did as right as we could by every person. Everybody had an opportunity to move all that stuff, but it was really, really, really hard. Even though I had an inkling that it was the right decision, every person from that team has since, continued their careers, applied all the skills that they learned at Fundbox towards furthering their career development, and just had massive success in whatever they ventured to do. The business, within about 2 months of launching the new office, grew revenue massively, to the point that it only took 60 days to replicate the per head results we were having in San Francisco with a brand new team in Dallas. And then we've scaled exponentially since then. So we've been proven that it was the right thing, even though it was the tough thing. And, it gave me a very strong degree of appreciation for how hard the right business decision can be. And I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, wow. Well, thanks for sharing both of those. I know that's not always the easiest thing to share. And, I'm curious to know, because it seems like a roller coaster. I've obviously been at startups where decisions have been made similar. You're talking about people's livelihoods potentially, and a lot of very emotionally taxing things. How did it feel to go from essentially saying, here's what's going on, to popping up the new office, and then ended up being the right decision? What was that like when you were in it?
Depends who you ask. If you ask my wife, it was way too many trips to the airport and times on a plane. If you ask, the folks that had the privilege to go to Dallas and the opportunity to be a part of the launch team on the ground and help us really build something from nothing, they found it to be a super enriching, although tough experience. I think for me personally, it felt conflicting. It felt like it was the right business thing, but while the ethics were all, tough to reconcile with, they were just, they were fair, they were equitable, all those things checked out. But there's still that pit in your stomach, right? That until everybody has landed on their feet, that you care deeply about, and that the business has recovered from what is a massive idea you pitched and a massive gamble and amount of money spent, and that those results have panned out. it's somewhat nerve-wracking, anxious, all those other things. Ultimately, a huge sense of relief. We ended up going on an amazing vacation. The like 2 weeks for 2 weeks right after that project ended, it was the first 2 week vacation of my life in a very, very long time at that point.
Wow.
And it was well worth it. So we celebrated properly because of the anxiety, the chaos, all the craziness, but also all the like exciting, fun stuff that happened along the way. It was a weird but super invigorating time for sure.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us and the audience there. Last question, we'll get you out of here on this one. We ask everybody on both seasons this question. If you could go back in time, now that you have the benefit of hindsight, what advice would you give yourself as you were entering into your career?
Not a joke, but kind of a joke. Practical advice. Learn Salesforce way before you have to use Salesforce. That would have been a great set of skills to have picked up. And it can make the difference on how many deals you close per month, like pretty meaningfully. I think the other part is assume positive intent and try to think big as much as possible. When you're like on the front lines of the business in an IC role like selling, you kind of get a lot of whiplash because the company makes decisions that impact you, impact how you sell, impact your customers, and you're pretty far removed from the top of the pendulum where like the decision making is happening. And it's really easy to feel like people don't get your world, don't get the impact on you, don't understand how this affects like the people that you sell to. And it's equally really easy to think like they're out to get me, they don't trust me, they don't respect me, they don't value me.
Yep.
Assuming positive intent and assuming that there is a good reason why people with way more experience than you are thinking about business direction in a way that might have, painful consequences for you, but might be right for the business is really important. And then seeking out answers to why that decision, why this strategy, why this direction is equally important. Assume positive intent and be curious. I wish that I had been given that advice way sooner because in hindsight, I think I misjudged some situations at certain points in time that now that I've had the opportunity to run large organizations, complex sales processes, et cetera, I understand intimately. And I actually look back on as that was a very delicate way to handle what would have actually been a very, very hard situation. So that would be probably my parting words of wisdom.
Nice. I love it. Two things picked up there. And one is, what we've heard quite a bit on the podcast, but it's the previous portion of your life is all scripted for you, right? You go to school, you have a curriculum, you set out to get the best grades you can, you graduate, you go to college or some jumbled version of that. And when you get out in the workforce, it's not all about you. It's not about anybody. You got to make your own way. And I think it's hard for some folks to kind of adapt and see it as like, everybody is generally making the right decision or trying their best to be good and trying their best to have the right intent behind it. But it doesn't always feel like that when you're in the moment, especially as somebody young in their career. And then the other one is, yes, of course, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. You got to learn that easy. You got to learn to be a master there. Well, Baz, I appreciate your time on the podcast. This has been really informative. Our audience is going to love it. Where can folks find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, spend too much time on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me there. That's the best place to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining in. Hit him up on LinkedIn. He's got a ton of knowledge, and we loved having him on the podcast. Hope to have you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's mutual. It's been a pleasure.